All right. Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time zone you're in. Hello. My name is Sarah Guthels. I am on the Reactor content team. So Microsoft has reactors all around the world where we typically like to have folks come in and learn things. And yeah, I'm on the team that thinks about what kind of things people might want to learn. If you saw any of our streams from last week, we had Megan talking about Python and a little bit about data science. And this week, we're going to be talking about web. So, hello, everyone. I'm coming from more remote Washington State today. Let me know in the comments where you're coming from. Today, we're going to be using CodePen. If you haven't used it before, I recommend signing up for it. It's free and it's really useful for trying out simple HTML, CSS, and JavaScript stuff. Just like when you're first learning and you're just trying to try things out. I really, really like this software, this website. So we're only going to be focusing on HTML and CSS today, but I recommend that you sign up. You don't have to sign up to test out some of the things we're using, but if you want to create your own things and try them out, I recommend you sign up. We also have just kind of like a summary with links to references and links to the code pens that I'm going to be sharing with you, so you can check those out too. All right. I'm going to be doing some live coding today, and I just want to say, please bear with me because I am using this like gamer keyboard and not quite used to it yet. I'm usually on the little Mac keyboards, and today I'm using like a legit gamer keyboard. So I'm not a gamer, and it's just bigger. My fingers are still getting used to it. So if I mess up, bear with me. But hello, everyone. If you're just joining, my name is Sarah Guthels. I am, one of the folks who works on the content for our Microsoft reactors. Reactors are typically locations all around the world where we engage with professional developers, folks who are interested in things like data science, AI, web dev, things like that. We're currently closed for our in-person events, and so we're bringing some events to you both live on Twitch if you're watching this live and on our YouTube channel. We are going to be working on CSS selectors today. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that. We're going to be using CodePen. So in the chat, I've put the URL. It's codepen.io. I recommend you signing up for that. You don't have to sign up for it though. So if you haven't and you don't want to, totally fine. We also have some resources on GitHub, which I just put into the chat. And don't worry, we'll put all of these URLs in the YouTube description as well if you're watching this on YouTube. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started today. I have my handy dandy list of all the things I want to say. So we're going to get through this. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to jump into the chat and ask us. I'll be monitoring it as well as Megan, my partner, will be checking it out as well and answering any questions. If you have any questions on YouTube, like you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to put them down in the comments and we'll answer them for you. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen here. This is my CodePen. I will be sharing this final file with you after the stream as well. So not only will I put it in the description of the YouTube channel, in the chat on the Twitch stream, and I will also put it in the GitHub repo. All right, so we're gonna start off with some very simple things. I'm gonna make a header that says, "This is my live stream." Oops. Great. Here's my header. Basic HTML. This side of the screen is going to hold HTML. This side of the screen is going to hold our CSS. CSS is basically the way we style our HTML. So here's my header. I could make this an H2 header, so slightly smaller. It automatically updates. I'm going to keep it as an H1 though. Notice that it did automatically update both sides. Another reason I like CodePen. One of the most straightforward things that you can do with CSS is you can just apply a style to a specific element type, basically. So for example, I can say that I want my header, and actually let me pull up my my other notes, I want my header to have an underline. Okay, so I'm going to say that I want my header to have a text decoration, and that decoration is an underline. Perfect. So anything that has an H1 element tag will have an underline. So if I were to create another header, that will also be underlined automatically. If it was in H2, it will not be underlined because we're only saying that H1 tags should be underlined. So this is the kind of basics of CSS, right? So anything that we have, any kind of tag, any type of element, we can specifically call it out and decorate the text or change the background color or image or whatever we want to do. We're going to get into a lot more as well, but to start with, this is just kind of like our basics. Great. I was just checking the chat for 5 seconds. There are 3 common selectors, however. This is the selector for an element or a tag, so like H1. But let's say that we had, instead of this one, we had 2 divs. Okay, so I'm going to create a div, and this div is going to be called class demo because, as I'm alluding to right now, I'm going to show you how we can also have specific styles for different classes and different IDs, and I'll explain what those mean in a minute. So we can have 2 different divs. Why am I putting these in divs? Well, let me clear out this H2 for a minute. This is what my website currently looks like. I've got an H1 tag, so I've got a header at the top, it's underlined, and then I've got 2 divs, one that says class demo, one that says ID demo. If I didn't have those, so I just had these, it would look like this. If it updates, there it goes. It'll look like this. We can, put like a break in there and have it just kind of like have a new line there. But then it'll be like we won't be able to specifically style the words class demo and the words ID demo in different ways because these are just text. These are just strings. They're not in a like grouping that we can easily style. So that's why we do the divs in this case. But let's say that I wanted to do a div, or I wanted to style divs in a certain way. So for example, let's style divs where we want the font weight. So this is going to be, bold, normal, even more bold, etc. We want the font weight to be bold. So this is saying that anything that's within a div, we want it to be bold. However, I don't necessarily want all of my divs to be bold. Right? So I might want to use divs as a way to separate out content, but I don't necessarily want to style all divs in the exact same way. This is where classes can come in handy. So for example, I can name this class demo, and I can specifically say that I actually, instead of all divs being bolded, I only want things with the class called class demo to be bolded. Okay? So I'm going to say this instead. So now if we look down here, we can see that I've got an H1 element, an H1 tag, and I've specifically said in my CSS that I want anything with an H1 tag to have an underline for the text decoration. So our H1 tag is underlined. Then I have 2 different divs. One of them is classified like it has a class of class demo, and one of them doesn't have any class. Okay, so class demo, I want anything within the class demo to be bolded, and I don't have any specific types of styling for anything that's just a div. H1 that's underlined, I've got class demo that's bolded, and I've got ID demo that's just kind of plain. Great, fairly simple, fairly straightforward. The benefit of this is, imagine if we wanted to have a lot of different styling here. So we wanted to have a class where anytime we had a div with like these words in it, it was a beautiful font, it had a background, when you hovered over it, it did something funny, it made noises, I don't know, just like a bunch of different styling around this type of content. This is where classes come in handy. You can kind of think about this if you have any experience in any object-oriented languages like Java or C# or anything like that. You can kind of think about it the same way. We can have a class. Maybe the class type is animal, and all animals, we want to do the same type of thing. Like we all want them to breathe and eat and drink water or something like that. It's kind of the same concept here. We have a class and it's called class demo. And in this case, we want anything within that class to be bolded. Perfect. However, what if we want to have an instance essentially of that class? Sorry, not an instance of that class, an instance of an element. So like one specific element, not a class of element, not all divs, not all H1 headers, not all class of class demo. We want to have just one specific thing be unique and have it be styled differently. That's where IDs come in. So we can have an ID, and let's call this one ID demo because we are super creative over here. And we can actually style ID demos similarly. Let's make the font red. Okay, so now we have 3 different elements here. We've got an H1 tag that says this is my live stream. We have a div with a class specified, and we have a div with an ID specified. Over here in the CSS, so this is all our HTML. Over here in our CSS, we say anything with an H1 tag, we want it to be underlined. Anything within the class demo, we want it to be bolded. And anything that is the ID is ID demo, we want it to be red. Now, why do we have something different? Like, why do we have class and ID? It kind of seems like they do the same thing. As I mentioned before we created the ID demo, it's for one specific instance, one specific element, right? Technically speaking, we shouldn't be able to do this. Technically speaking, the recommendation is that we do not have 2 different elements with the same ID, because that's the whole point of an ID. Like if you want to have 2 different elements with the same ID, you should be using a class. That's the point of a class. If you want to have 2 different elements with the same ID, that's kind of defeats the purpose. Now, CodePen will correctly do this, like it'll correctly style, assuming that we have 2 different elements with the same ID. And most modern browsers will also understand what needs to be done and correctly do it. However, it's good practice to not do it in this way. It's good practice because imagine if our HTML was, many, many more lines long. It's not just 5 lines or technically 4 lines here. Let's even get rid of that one. It's not 4 lines long, but let's pretend like this is like a huge HTML file. It's bringing in different files. It's like, just like, I don't know, just like a lot bigger. If you go to make a change in the CSS and you thought that there was only one element with the ID demo, and you made that change from red to blue, and then all of a sudden, a bunch of different text started changing to blue, it would be really, really confusing and hard to debug because you made the assumption correctly that there's only one element with the ID demo. And so it would just be fairly confusing. It might also be that you have, multiple CSS files that you're importing into your HTML file, and it would just be hard to track down. So even though it's technically possible and a lot of modern browsers will follow this and kind of help you out, it'll make the right assumptions, it's still not best practice. So instead, if you wanted to make that a class, we could have class demo, for example, and let's name this one class demo 2. I like to always make sure that we've got the proper naming because, again, confusion. Okay, so now we know that we can have 2 different elements with the same class and it'll be styled in the same way. We can also have an element with a specific ID, and that'll be styled differently. That all sounds pretty good. I want to make sure I'm not, yep, okay. That all sounds pretty good, right? The next bit I wanted to talk to you about is, let me bring this out, great, is called scoring. Okay, so this is where, what if we had more than one? So for example, what if we had this ID demo, and we actually wanted it to also be a part of the class demo. So we did something like this. Okay, I tried to lower it. I don't think I lowered it fast enough. I want you to take like 5 seconds and think about what you think will happen here. So basically now we've added a new element. So this is underlined, this is bolded, this is blue, this is bolded. What will this be? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. By the way, in my past, I've been a teacher. I really hated it when people would be like, hey, what do you think will happen here? And then they immediately tell you. So I always try to give a little bit of time. It might feel a little bit awkward, but I do think it's very, very important. It's actually like research proven. You should make an opinion. Like, even if it's wrong, you should make an opinion. So when I say, what do you think will happen? Please try to actually like think about it and decide and maybe even write it down. Perfect. It's blue and bold. Probably an easy assumption. Now, question though. Let's say that in class demo, I'm going to lower this again. Let's say in class demo, like that's fairly obvious. I mean, one is bolding, one is blue. If I'm applying both an ID and a class to this element, yeah, it should probably be blue and bolded. However, what if I did this? What do we think would happen here? So now the problem is that one thing says it should be bolded and red, and one thing says it should be blue. Will it be purple? Will half the word be red and half the word be blue? I mean, obviously that probably doesn't make any sense, but what color will it choose? Will it choose red or will it choose blue? If we think back to what a class is and what an ID is, a class applies to anything of that class and an ID applies to one specific element. So what I think does make sense is that it is still blue. And the reason is there should only be one element with this ID, which actually, yeah, let's just go ahead and get rid of that. There should only be one element with this ID, ID demo. And if we had specified that that one element should be blue, then the assumption is that that's probably what we actually want that specific element to be, right? So for example, if you had, and this example is not going to be great. If you had a class, I'm going back to kind of that object-oriented programming. If you had a class of animals, and then you specified that all animals have 4 legs, maybe it's a class of dogs, let's be more specific, a class of dogs, and you said all dogs have 4 legs, and then you had one specific instance, and you went in and changed that instance to say that that instance had only 3 legs, because maybe your dog only has 3 legs, you would assume that that instance should have 3 legs and that you don't take the like higher level thing, which is the class. Does that make sense? It's not exactly a one-to-one comparison, but that's the way I like to think about it, coming from an object-oriented background. Basically, a class is kind of like an overall categorization, and an ID is for that specific item. So for that specific item, we want it to be blue and not red. Okay, that I think makes sense. Yes, ID wins higher specificity. That's a hard word. Here comes the tricky part, though. Okay, well, first of all, let's pretend like we had let's do a div. So let's actually just make a div class here. And again, I'm going to lower this. And now I'm going to say color is green. So what do we think will happen here? So now we have 3 things that are competing for ID and class demo. We have 3 things that are competing. We have the element tag, which is div. We have the ID, which is ID demo, and we have the class, which is class demo. And all 3 of them have a color that we want it to be. Again, it's going to stay blue. And the reason is div is even like, so it stays blue. And also, if you notice, class demo and class demo 2 remain red. And the reason is div is even less specific, right? So every single div should be green unless you're class demo class, then you should be red, unless you have the specific ID demo, then you should be blue. That makes sense? So div, like an element selector, is more broad than a class selector is more broad than an ID selector. And so that's the order in which we're going to take it. Now, here's the tricky part. I'm going to create another one, and I'm going to lower this again. I'm going to create another one called div, and we're going to call this class demo. And you know what? I'm going to add a second class. Because maybe we have something where, it is of one type, but it's also of another. So maybe it is like a specific type of link, but it's also a specific type of text, or I don't know. So this is 2 classes. Okay. So to start with, it's just going to be red because we only have CSS for class demo, not for class demo 2. But let's say that we add in, and this time we're going to have it be yellow. Okay. Now what's going to happen? Are the words 2 classes going to be red, or are they going to be yellow? So we know they're not going to be green because it has the class specification. And we know it's not going to be blue because it doesn't have the ID. So it's either going to be red or yellow. It's red. What if how would I make this yellow though? Like, let's say I want it to be bold, but I also want it to be yellow. I wish it was orange. Someone in the comments said orange. That'd be a neat way to like create different colors, right? I want it to be yellow. So what if I switch these around? Do you think that'll make a difference? It did. Now it's yellow. So whichever one comes first is the one that it's going to use. So I encourage you to play around with this. This feels like one of those like gotcha questions on an exam or something like that, right? But it isn't. When we're building really large HTML, there's going to be times when we have things that we want it to have, one specific style, but then it also has this other attribute that makes us want it to have another style. I really should have had a good example of this, and maybe next time I'll do that. But you could imagine something like, you have a bunch of quotes from books, and maybe anything that is a fantasy book, you want the quotes to be italicized, and anything that is, a horror book, you want them to be bold. And so things that, are in those specific categories, great. That makes sense. They'll be either italicized or bold, but some things you want them to be both italicized and bold because they're horror fiction or horror fantasy or something like that. I have no clue. Basically, there are instances in which you will want to have multiple classes, and knowing how they will be applied will be very important. Perfect. Okay. So that's the beginning of kind of CSS selectors and what's going on. So that's the 3 common selectors to review are elements. So that's like the H1 and the div here, classes like class demo and class demo 2, and IDs like ID demo. We know that if it has an ID, it's going to choose that over a class, which will choose that over an element or a tag selector. So we know the ordering there, and we know and understand how it'll choose one over the other. All right. The next thing that is interesting is called combinators. So this is basically making any style changes based on the hierarchy of the HTML. Okay, so let's get an example of that. In this example, I'm just going to lower this down, keep it all in the same file, but I'm going to lower it. I'm going to create a simple, and here I'll actually put in a quick comment here. This below here is for the selectors and the scoring. Perfect. Next, what we're going to do is talk about combinators. I was going to say combinatorics. That's not right. Combinators. Okay, so let's make a comment here. Below here is talking about combinators. I'm going to create a simple navigation. Okay, so basically like what you would see if you clicked on a menu button or something like that. So if you clicked on a menu, you know, when we create a navigator inside of HTML, it looks something like this. You probably have a link. So if you haven't done this before, there's a lot of really great resources out there. Just search like a link in HTML. This is basically how you create a link. So the A tag refers to a link. The href is pointing to the URL that it is. So we're pretending like we have, you know, a file called home. This part is the text to display. So this is our home right here, our home link. Instead of just having like, let's say, okay, so let's say we had a home link. Let's say that we also had maybe like a link to shops, like our shop, because we're selling products. Okay, so we're going to have href equals shop. And we're going to call it shop. Okay, this isn't looking too great. I mean, it's got a shop. If I like, I probably want like an about us type thing. This is the URL, so we're going to keep it like that. But it's all on the same line, which doesn't look super great. Let's say maybe like we want to have careers or something, and these should probably be just to keep with the styling. Yeah, it doesn't look super great down here at the bottom. Yeah, so I'm gonna separate these out into sections. It's like the shop is more of like our products, and then the about us and careers is more like our purpose or who we are. So I'm gonna go ahead and separate these out. I'm gonna create sections to separate these out. So this is one section, and then we're gonna create a second section here. Okay, let me bring this down a little bit so you can see the whole thing. Okay, so now we've got a nav that's got home, and then we've got two other sections. We've got the shop, and then we've got the about us and the careers. Okay, still kind of weird. I mean, the about us and the careers don't like they're still on the same line, so that looks kind of strange. I don't really like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that anytime there's a link inside of a nav, I want to make sure that it has a new line after it, basically. So what I'm going to say is that anytime that there's a nav, and then inside of that nav, there's a link, then I want to make sure that we've got a new line inside of it. Okay, there we go. So now for every nav, for every link inside of that nav, there's a new line inside of it. And I didn't have to, you know, put a break here or anything like that. It's just that in a navigation, it makes a lot more sense to have links be on their own line and never to have them be on the same line. So even if we didn't have these different sections, like it just makes more sense to do that. So for every link inside of a nav, I want to have a new line, basically. This is called Descendant Selector. So this is, if you have this styling here, you have nav with a space and then the link. So this is called Descendant Selector. So when you just have the parent and then any kind of child below it, that's why this worked for both the home link as well as the links that are down here, because the links that are down here are not directly children of nav. They are children of section, which is a child of nav. Perfect. So now we can see that all descendants of nav that have the tag A are going to have that new line after it, right? But what if we wanted to have the very first link, so the home link, specifically be bold, right? So we wanted to have the very first link be bold because it's like the main link. And then maybe we're going to have like different sections below it, okay? If we only wanted the direct child of nav, okay? So nav here, oops. But we only wanted the direct child. Any link that is a direct child of nav, we want the font weight to be bold. Awesome. So that's going to make home bold and the rest of them not, which makes a lot of sense, right? Oftentimes, like that first one is like you want to make sure that people remember to go there. So we want that one to be bold. This syntax here, where you have nav and then the greater than and then a for link, that's going to say only direct children will be styled in this way. You can also do this, like, let's say, you know, instead of just having them be in different sections that we see, let's actually make them different sections as well. So let's say that we wanted to say this is like products, and this is like purpose. Perfect. So now we've got two different sections. Oops. Oh gosh darn it. Let's save this. And let's refresh this because these don't actually go anywhere. So now we've got two different kind of sections, right? So we've got the home link that's bolded, and then we've got a section called products and a section called purpose. And under the product section, we've got the shop, and under the purpose section, we've got the about us and the careers. Great, awesome, sounds good. I want anything that is a span, so products and purpose, I want those to be bold as well. For that, we can actually do a child of a child. So maybe you don't want everything that is span to be bolded, or maybe you don't want everything within nav that is span to be bolded. Maybe you just want anything that is in a nav and also in a section and also in a span ID, or sorry, not ID, but element tag to be bolded. Great. So this will just bold those ones, right? So when we talk about combinators, basically you can add as many depths as you want. We can also do some other things. There's also like this one here. So any span where you've got a sibling that is a link, maybe we want the text to be red. So any span where it has a sibling that is a link. And so this span begins and ends here. Its sibling is this, and its parent is section. So this span has a sibling called shop, and we want that to be red. And this span actually has two siblings called about us and career, and we want those to be red. So the tilde will make it red. And if you wanted only the one directly after it, so it's immediate sibling, maybe we want immediate siblings to be underlined for some reason. We can do this. Oops. That should only be the immediate sibling. Not, oh, well, they're links. That's not going to be helpful, is it? Maybe we want immediate siblings to actually be, I don't know, font weight bold. So that'll make, whoa, oh gosh. Keep doing this thing where I click on the actual links, which means I should really just change these. That's the one bad thing about, like, you know, testing things out. You accidentally click on things, they don't actually go anywhere. Okay, there we go. So we wanted this one to be font weight bold. So that's going to make shop and about us bold. So these are anything that is directly after span that is a sibling, we want it to be bold. So that's not going to apply to all of them. It's only going to apply to the about us one. So this is just a simple example to talk a little bit about the combinators. You can play around with this, you know, see how deep you can go, etc. Awesome. All right, we're going to move on to pseudo classes. So pseudo classes are basically classes that exist that you don't have to necessarily specify. So an example of this is if we wanted to talk about what should happen when we hover over a link inside of a navigation. All right, so I'm going to lower these down a bit, and I'm going to say that anything that is a link that you hover over, what I want to happen is I want the color to turn to green. Okay, so anytime I hover over a link, the text turns green. Awesome. We can also change this, for example, if you want to have a different color based on whether you've visited the page or not. So another good example is nav a visited. So maybe if you've visited the page before, then I want the color to be purple. I don't know. And if you haven't visited the page before, then that's just any link, right? So if you're a link, you haven't visited it before, then maybe I want the color to be, I don't know, yellow. Probably never want text to be yellow, but it's fine. Perfect. Let's go ahead and get rid of this one though. Oh, typo. So all links are yellow. If you hover over them, they should turn green. And if you click on them, they turn purple. That was a trick. Since they're all pointing to the same URL, it thought that they all got turned purple. They didn't clearly, so yeah. All right. Another one that's kind of interesting is, and this one, I'm trying to think of like a good concrete example for this. So you can color things that are like the first child of a certain type of thing. Okay, so for example, we can say something like a first child, first child. And let's get rid of some of these. I'm just gonna, it's getting a little messy. So let's go ahead and, oops, get rid of the spans. Okay, so now, oops, oh gosh darn it. Sorry, we still wanted to have the display block one. We just don't want these. Nav A spans can be bold and then those ones. Okay, cool. So that's gonna leave the spans bold and then all of these on their own line. Perfect. So we can do something like this. And so what that's going to do is it's going to grab, whoa, sorry, that was a weird thing. The first child that is an A, it's going to color the background this gray color. Okay. But let's say that we don't want the first one to be colored. What we can do is we can, or here, why don't we also just try this? Like, what if we did like the first section? What would happen there? Oh, it doesn't do a whole section, I guess. Let's do a first span. So these both are the first span of their parent, right? So purpose is the first span of this section and products is the first span of this section. There's also the only span of them. And so both of them are going to be highlighted. We can also do this with links. And in this case, again, we're only going to do the first one here. But let's say we wanted to take the second one, we can do the nth child instead and do 2 here. and that's going to take the second child. So A is the first child, and then each of these are basically like the first grandchild. This is worth just kind of playing around with, trying out. Uh, it makes a lot more sense when you have a very specific like goal in mind, but it's worth trying out. Okay, so those are pseudo classes. The syntax for that is you have one colon in between the type and then the pseudo class. On the GitHub repo, we have links to the different W3 Schools pages that will have all of the examples there, and then ways that you can play with it too. The next thing that we're going to talk about are pseudo elements. Now, this one is a little bit different. It's essentially the same thing as the pseudo classes, except we're going to actually, instead of like where it is in the HTML file, we're going to actually look at the values inside of. So we're gonna look at the actual values of things. So I'm going to grab a bunch of lorem ipsum text, and I'm going to paste it in here. So I've just got a bunch of different paragraphs of lorem ipsum text. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that the first letter of every single paragraph is big and bold. Okay, so not just like the first paragraph, because then that'll change the entire paragraph, but the first letter. So when we're talking about pseudo elements, we use 2 colons. And again, this is the difference between pseudo classes and pseudo elements, is essentially that pseudo elements is looking at the actual values, like the actual like element value, not just where it is. So I want the font size to be 20, and I want my font weight to be bold. So that's going to change the first letter of every single paragraph to be big and bold. And you know how on like storybooks, maybe like the intro or something is like this, but then you want the very, very first one to be red also, or something like that. You can also do that. So you can say that I want the first child. So this is going to be the first paragraph element, and the first letter of that first child to be red. That's going to change only this first one to be red. Okay. Perfect. So there's a lot of other, one other favorite one that I like to do is, especially when we're doing the, where aren't you typing? Oops, whoa, okay. Let's say that you want, when someone is highlighting something, like selecting it, that like it highlights it for you. So we can say something like this. And then what that'll do is, as you're selecting text, it'll highlight it for you. So select, 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 select. Pretty awesome. All right. We have about 10 minutes left, and I want to go over one last thing. This last bit is on attribute filters. So depending on the like value, like attributes, so depending on the value of an element, we might want to do different things. We might want to like add text, for example. So an example here is, let's say that we had an application that we want people to fill out. So we say, want to work here, fill out our, and then we have a link to it. So want to work here, fill out our application. But I want to make sure that people know that this application is not a web app. Like this is not going to take you to a web form and have you fill it out. It's actually just a PDF file. And so, and let's say I had a lot of PDF files on my site that I wanted people to just know that these are PDF files. This is where the attribute filters can come in handy. So for any link inside specifically the href, I want to check to see if the end or if it ends with PDF. Okay. So find a link, look at the href element or like piece. If that value ends in PDF, then after that, I want the content, like the value to actually change. And I want to specifically add a space PDF like that. Okay, so that would make it so that any PDF that's linked to from my site will actually get this like PDF at the end. This might also be useful, like let's say, and follow us on Twitter. And then we say like a href equals here. And the URL that I'm going to put in here, let's just say it's my Twitter. I want people to know that this is a secure site, let's just say. So we can also say that any link that begins with HTTPS, then before it, I want to type that. I don't know. It's kind of weird. I don't see why you would want to do that. Kind of strange. Also, why is this not showing up? I think maybe I accidentally clicked. There you go. Secure site here. But you don't have to necessarily like change the content. You know, you can do other things. And you guessed it, this is the ends with, this is the begins with, and if you wanted to do like exactly equals, then you can change it to be, you could just have it be equal. So maybe you say something like, view our job descriptions here. And maybe this href is actually this page. So you're just going to use this. Then maybe you can say something like, if the href is that page, then like after I want to say, or something like that. So then that way they know that they're not getting redirected to a new page. All right. I wanted to point out our GitHub repo with all of the content here. So we went over today common selectors. We went over what happens when you have conflicting style guidelines. We went over combinators, pseudo classes, pseudo elements, and attribute filters. For each of these, we actually have a CodePen example for them that specifically talks about those ones. I also linked some of the resources that I talked about. And then I have all of the CodePen examples just at the bottom as well. So you can follow along. I'll put this one in there also. I did delete a little bit. I usually try not to delete, but it was starting to get a little bit messy. So I will make sure to link these as well. If you have any questions after this live stream and you're watching this on YouTube, please don't hesitate to put them down in the comments below. We'd be happy to try to answer them. I just wanted to remind you all that we do have live streams every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Pacific and every Thursday at 9 a.m. Pacific on this Twitch stream. I'll put the link in the YouTube description. If you're watching this live, then you already know it. You can find the Reactor meetup pages. Let me zoom in on this. So especially for once we reopen those physical locations, we highly encourage you to join those meetup groups because we'll post not only these streams and any future streams, but as well, but we will also be posting our live events. All right. I will talk to you all soon. Feel free to reach out on Twitter or LinkedIn or our meetup pages. Thanks everyone for joining us today.